Gaming Bolt presents 15 times gamers got it wrong and developers listened anyway. We as gamers love this hobby, and sometimes in the heat of something we disagree with, a loud minority who thinks they know best can sometimes become the squeaky wheel that gets the grease. But then there's those times when the developers don't actually understand why a game design element is the way it is, and when a developer capitulates, the game becomes worse for it. Let's talk about 15 of those times here, and if we missed some good ones, we'd love to hear some more in the comments. Lawbreakers, Health Regeneration. Gears of War scion Cliff Bleszinski had some good ideas with his gravity shooter, Lawbreakers, but when it didn't take off like he hoped, major changes came to the game, including introducing regenerating health to resolve the problems some gamers were having with dying too often and too fast. But tossing the game balance out of the window to buff everybody's health and make it regenerate while not under fire just made the games draw out way too long. Dead Rising 4, the removal of the time limit. Dead Rising has always been a somewhat irreverent take on zombies, treating the idea with the kind of silliness that it honestly kind of deserves. But the lack of threat from the zombies themselves was covered by the time limits in earlier games, forcing players to act quickly. Dead Rising 4 loses this simply because focus tests said players didn't like it. Turns out a lot of players also didn't like the game having no tension or threat for the removal either. Metal Gear Solid 5, less story and cutscenes. Hideo Kojima is a man with a lot to say in his games, but after Metal Gear Solid 4 was closer to Movie Gear Solid 4 in many situations, it was clear that Kojima was in dire need of an editor. For many, however, the Phantom Pain went too far in the other direction, and while we got what is perhaps the tightest gameplay in the entire, now defunct series, Metal Gear Dies with Kojima, sorry Survive, we didn't get to enjoy the true over-the-top crazy that made the Metal Gear series so memorable, because gamers thought MGS4 was overwhelming. Mirror's Edge Catalyst, Open World. The story of Faith Connors, the Runner, was one of the freshest titles out of DICE last generation, but the one thing that Mirror's Edge didn't need when it came around for a reboot and a second try was an open world. The bland, white rooftops of the City of Glass felt poorly designed and were a drag to run back and forth through, with the only mission type that used the open world in a meaningful way being when you had to get away from the fuzz. The best parts of Mirror's Edge Catalyst were when a mission took you inside a building, where the environment was more designed for a one-way path, which is rather telling in itself. Star Wars Battlefront 2. Battlefront 1 was too content light, and look what they did to our pride and accomplishment. Star Wars is the kind of monumental IP that can inspire both hope in what it can mean and also some pretty insane backlash. The first EA Star Wars Battlefront was a multiplayer-only mess that was rushed to market to line up with Episode 7, which understandably annoyed some players who could remember the more fully featured entries from 2 generations before. Star Wars Battlefront 2 was supposed to be the apology for that, giving us more of the large-scale battles we enjoyed in multiplayer, along with a canon single-player story of some kind. The loot box-riddled mess of an online and cut-off single-player we ended up getting, well, let's say we felt none of the pride and accomplishment the team was aiming for. Sonic Forces Avatar Character. Sonic just can't catch a break. But ever since Sega went third-party and Sonic went 3D, the blue blur has stumbled around. Through his train wrecks, he kept his fans. Sonic Forces would placate those superfans with finally letting them bring Jeff the Hedgehog into the Sonic universe. It's just a shame that shoehorning in the Avatar turned the rest of the game into bad fanfiction stapled onto poor level design. At least Jeff could have a hat that let everyone know he was a gamer. Pokemon X and Y. Generation 1 Pandering. Pokemon was finally taking that leap into 3D with Pokemon X and Pokemon Y on the 3DS, which by itself was already a huge deal. And the leap itself might have been enough to call back some lapsed fans. But instead of allowing the game to stand on its own, letting the new region and Pokemon take the spotlight, a large amount of the game, like Mega Evolution, which was largely given to Generation 1 Pokemon, and the fact that you receive an extra starter for the only time in the series from Kanto, made the new games feel very reliant on those old standbys. Metal Gear Solid 4. answering MGS2's burning questions Kojima didn't really want to spell out. Sometimes creators become unfortunately shackled to their creations when they really don't want to be. Kojima never intended to make Metal Gear Solid 3, or Metal Gear Solid 4 for that matter. If the questions he laid down throughout Metal Gear Solid 2 were going to be answered, Kojima never wanted to be the one to do it. Screeching fans locked him into doing it though, and we got the tangled mess that wrapping up all those various plot points could only lead to. Pokemon Black and White. Tighter hand-holding. Pokemon Black and White marked in some ways one of the bravest titles in the series up to that point. No old Pokemon would show up before the credits rolled, which helped create a gameplay experience similar to the first-time player, since no Pokemon would be easily identified. What they didn't try to emulate from older titles was giving the player leeway to explore. After kids dropped their Diamond or Pearl games because they got lost and parents complained, Game Freak has put a tighter and tighter leash on game progression ever since. Shadow the Hedgehog. Give Sonic a gun. We've already talked about just how weird the Sonic the Hedgehog fanbase can be, but one of the worst games in the series came out of apparent requests that Sonic team head Yuji Naka would receive to give Sonic a gun. Good sense would prevail, and they would eventually take this idea and give it to Sonic Adventure 2 favorite, Shadow. What we got was a game that was disjointed at best and painfully edgy at worst. Resident Evil 5 Action Focus. Who exactly decided that survival horror didn't have a market anymore? Resident Evil 4 took a decidedly more action movie cheese approach to the games, but there was still that tense undercurrent and lack of materials that made it feel like a Resident Evil game. But by the time Resident Evil 5 came around, a series that was once about exploring an abandoned mansion with genetic experiments running loose now starred a roid rage Chris and his ditzy sidekick shooting wildly at the bad guys, losing the soul until Resident Evil 7 got it back. Paper Mario Sticker Star. Ditching the story. One of Shigeru Miyamoto's missteps, the Paper Mario series was an RPG subsidy that had a ton of charm, and a wide cast of characters that brought some crazy stories to life. But when it came time to bring the series to the 3DS, Miyamoto would make the declaration to not focus on story, or use characters that weren't toads. Which, for an RPG, is just... what? Halo series. Adding sprinting. Halo used to be at the top of the world, but after Halo 3, gamers' attentions turned elsewhere for their shooting fix. Perhaps to chase after that Call of Duty, mechanics such as sprinting were introduced to a game that wasn't designed to have it, forcing the maps larger and more barren, to the point where it didn't feel like Halo anymore. Mass Effect 3. The ending. You don't have to be a Mass Effect fan to know that the original ending for the third game, which was supposed to cap off the series, was just poor storytelling. It invoked Deus Ex Machina, failed to answer questions, and generally just lost contextual awareness. Players complain, BioWare changes the ending. That's good, right? Not really. The improved ending basically fixes some cutscenes that made no sense in immediate context, but we're still left with all of its other problems. So now we have a bad ending and compromised artistic and creative integrity. Mass Effect Andromeda. Going open world. The original Mass Effect was a rather open RPG, letting players explore the surfaces of planets and tackle things in whatever order they chose. When BioWare developed the sequels, they removed the jank, but also the exploration, and we were left with polished games and hugely focused storytelling, but mostly linear progression and directed player agency. There were many who wanted a return to the original game's style, but with the polish and improvements of the second and third games. Win-win, right? So Mass Effect Andromeda goes open world, directly evoking the original game, and is a poorer game for it. While the combat was great, remember, this was the thing BioWare perfected in the second and third games. The open world was banal and trite, with tiresome padding and fetch quests that diluted the storytelling and brought the good parts of the game, such as they were, down. Not everything needs to be open world, folks.
And that'll be about it for this one. If you guys like what we're doing at Gaming Vault, please consider subscribing to our channel, and I'll see you guys on the next video.